In the final years of the 19th century, as the gears of the Industrial Revolution ground old superstitions to dust, a different kind of shadow crept into the hidden corners of America. This was the age of the steam engine and the telegraph, when science promised to banish all ghosts. But in the coastal town of Hollow Bay, Massachusetts, whispers of a power older than steel and steam still circulated through the noisy textile mills and the dim dockside taverns, whispers of a dynasty whose wealth did not seem to stem from spinning looms, whispers of strange plants that glowed in the night and of workers who vanished without a word. This is the story of the Marwood dynasty and the secret cult behind their industrial empire. The year was 1885. Hollow Bay, Massachusetts, was a small industrial hub where the smoke from textile mills mingled with the salty fog of the Atlantic. The age of sail was over, replaced by powerful steamships, yet storms still regularly lashed the coast, bringing with them eerie tales of lost ships and strange lights flickering on the cliffs. The town's brick-paved streets were always bustling with mill workers and sailors, men and women trying to find their footing in a rapidly changing world. Delivery wagons clattered over the wet streets, their wheels rolling through puddles left by sudden afternoon showers. Ladies in fashionable dresses strolled down the main street, while industrialists in finely tailored suits discussed cotton prices and new shipping routes at the Commerce Club. However, beneath the veneer of progress, primal fears stirred in the thick fog and the dark pine forests surrounding the town. Remnants of ancient folklore mingled with the anxieties of the machine age. Immigrants from Ireland and Eastern Europe whispered to their children of old-world creatures, spirits that could not be banished by steam engines or electric light. And in certain mansions, behind heavy oak doors, wealthy industrialists were exploring secrets their Puritan ancestors would never have countenanced. No one was more versed in these mysteries than the Marwood family of Blackthorn Manor, perched on a sheer cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Their dark stone Gothic revival mansion stood defiantly against the storms, surrounded by a garden that locals claimed grew plants not of this world. By day, the Marwood textile mill was a symbol of Hollow Bay's prosperity and enterprise. But by night, especially when the fog rolled in from the sea, the manor and its surrounding lands became something else entirely. Samuel Marwood arrived in Hollow Bay in 1865, a man with an obscure past but an iron will. The records at the town hall described him only as an investor from New York, about 30 years old, with considerable capital. Within a few years, he had built the Marwood Mill, transforming it from a small workshop into a massive production facility, outcompeting all rivals. While other mills struggled with strikes, fires, or lost cotton shipments, Marwood's mill seemed immune to all risk. His ships, modern steam vessels, always returned on schedule, their holds filled with raw cotton from the south and secret crates that were never entered into the ledgers. Some said Samuel had an uncanny ability to predict the market, always buying low and selling high. Others claimed he had deals with the dockside gangs, using thugs to intimidate workers and quash any thoughts of striking. But a few former workers and retired sailors whispered darker theories that Samuel had ways of ensuring smooth operations, rituals performed in the privacy of his office at Blackthorn Manor on nights when the sky was starless. Within a decade, he had established himself as a leading industrialist. The Marwood Mill, now expanded with several new production wings, operated day and night with astonishing efficiency. His office in the town centre employed a team of accountants and managers, and his name appeared on the board of the Hollow Bay Bank, despite the rumors about his past. When asked about his family or the source of his New York fortune, Samuel would offer a polite but cold smile and deftly change the subject, leaving his questioner with the feeling that their curiosity was unwelcome. By 1880, as Hollow Bay was booming, Samuel had amassed enough wealth to acquire an old lighthouse and its surrounding land on Blackthorn Cliff, where a bankrupt old family had moved away. The lighthouse had long been decommissioned, its stone structure weathered by wind and salt, and the lightkeeper's cottage was dilapidated, its windows shattered. What was most disturbing to the local fishermen was a system of natural sea caves directly beneath the cliff, a place they called the teeth of the deep sea. They believed these caves were home to the spirits of the drowned and generally avoided the area, especially at night when the low tide revealed the dark cave mouths. Samuel, however, showed a particular interest in this cave system. Within weeks of acquiring the land, he had workers secretly clear and reinforce the passages inside, ordering the installation of heavy iron doors and the construction of a large stone platform in the center of the widest cavern. When asked about the purpose of this work, Samuel vaguely explained that he was creating a special wine cellar, where the temperature and humidity of the caves would bring his vintages to perfection. This decision sparked much discussion among Hollow Bay's elite. Despite his wealth, Samuel remained an enigma. Moreover, his investment in such a remote and dangerous piece of land struck many as odd. Sea caves were notoriously unstable, and their renovation required a huge expense. Yet, Samuel seemed unbothered by the gossip or the cost, proceeding with the work with the confidence of a man executing a meticulously calculated plan. While other mills had to shut down during the economic depression of the 1872, the Marwood Mill thrived more than ever. The financial crisis that crippled New England's industry seemed to have no effect on Samuel's operations. Somehow, his contracts remained secure, his supply of raw cotton was never interrupted, and his products always found a market, even when competitors were forced to sell at a loss. When labor strikes swept the region, Samuel maintained peace in his mill, both by placating union leaders with generous promises and by secretly eliminating the more radical agitators. When the economy recovered, he emerged as a giant, praised for his shrewdness and leadership during difficult times. Even more remarkable was the productivity of the mill itself. Samuel seemed to have a strange ability to avoid factory inspections, and his machinery never broke down, even when running continuously at maximum capacity. The workers at the Marwood Mill, who had initially arrived with hope and fatigue, worked with a synchronicity that was almost unnatural. They operated the dangerous machines in an eerie silence, their eyes vacant, responding to the foreman's commands with mechanical obedience. Visiting investors commented on their incredible discipline, but Samuel would just smile and attribute it to an efficient work environment and worker satisfaction. Once a month, on the night of the new moon, Samuel would personally visit the workers' quarters and select one of the strongest men single and with no family nearby for what he called special maintenance work in the caves beneath Blackthorn Cliff. These men never returned to the mill. When asked about their fate, Samuel would explain that they had received a handsome bonus and moved west to seek new opportunities. The other workers never discussed the departed men, not even in the taverns after work. Their resigned silence on the matter was, perhaps, the most unsettling aspect of all. By 1885, Marwood's empire had expanded throughout New England, his mill producing the finest textiles in the region, exported all over the world. Blackthorn Manor, once a ruin, had been transformed into a masterpiece of Gothic revival architecture, its stone towers rising proudly on the cliff. The interior was adorned with intricately carved woodwork and art from Europe. The gardens surrounding the manor were meticulously cared for, planted with strange flora that Evelyn Harper would later recognize as not belonging to Earth. Their dark purple and black blossoms filled the night air with a strange fragrance, both sweet and slightly metallic. Samuel was a striking figure, tall and elegant, with deep-set blue eyes that seemed to see right through a person. At 50, he retained the youthful appearance and energy of a man in his early 30s, a fact that astonished and intrigued his business peers. His thick black hair showed no trace of gray, giving him a powerful appearance that commanded respect in any boardroom. His hands were those of a capitalist rather than a laborer, long-fingered and well-manicured, despite his frequent supervision of the noisy mill operations. Most remarkable was his voice, a deep, powerful baritone that could persuade the most difficult board of directors or calm the most disgruntled workers. When Samuel Marwood spoke, people listened, often finding themselves swept up in his vision without realizing it. His wife, Ilara, had died years ago in a mysterious accident at sea. It was said she was a beautiful woman with golden hair and sad eyes, who rarely left Blackthorn Manor. She had appeared in Hollow Bay with Samuel, introduced as his wife, but no one knew anything about her family or her past. They had 2 children, but only the youngest daughter, Clara, was still alive. Ilara's death only added to the mystery surrounding the family, and it was whispered that she had discovered one of her husband's dark secrets and paid the price. After his wife's death, Samuel became even more withdrawn. He rarely hosted parties, and when he attended town events, he often stood alone, observing the crowd with his analytical, deep blue eyes that made even his business partners wary. He always wore dark, perfectly tailored suits, usually charcoal or black, which accentuated his unusually pale skin. Around his wrist, he always wore a silver pocket watch, its lid engraved with strange geometric symbols, unlike any known alchemical or astronomical signs. When someone asked about it, he would glance at it and say it was a family memento, a reminder of time and its eternal cycles. He had only one living child, his 9-year-old daughter, Clara. The eldest son, Julian, had disappeared several years prior. It was said he had run off to join the army, but rumors suggested he had defied his father and suffered the same fate as his mother. Clara was a shy, almost invisible girl, with dark hair and large, perpetually frightened eyes. She possessed a keen intuition, seeming to sense things others couldn't see, but was trapped in silence by her father's overwhelming shadow. The Marwood family was also known for its contributions to the community, but in a calculated way. Samuel funded the construction of the town's new library, but on the condition that a private wing be reserved for scientific and philosophical texts of his choosing. He also made a large donation to the local hospital to build a new research wing, but insisted that the experiments be conducted in absolute privacy. These acts earned him the respect of the town council and the gratitude of the beneficiaries. Few dared to question the motives behind Samuel Marwood's generosity. They simply accepted that a successful industrialist always sought to leave his mark, however peculiar that mark might be. Samuel Marwood rarely hosted galas, but he often invited important business partners and influential scientists to Blackthorn Manor for private dinners. Here, the elite of New England's industry would marvel at his personal library and his collection of strange artifacts. Displayed in carefully lit glass cases were items that any university would covet. Meteorite fragments with previously unknown crystalline structures, seeming to emit a faint light from within. Ancient astronomical instruments of brass and lens, more complex than anything produced in the current era. Old leather-bound books, written in lost languages, filled with diagrams of constellations that did not exist on modern star charts and drawings of bizarre life forms. Samuel would guide his guests through this gallery with the serious demeanor of a researcher, sharing theories about the origin and meaning of each item. His stories often hinted at knowledge beyond human understanding and the unexplored possibilities of the universe. He presented himself as a pioneer of science, particularly interested in the origins of life and its potential existence on other worlds. Most guests were impressed by his intellect and vision, if perhaps a little overwhelmed by ideas too radical for an industrialist. The highlight of these gatherings was always the conversation in his study, where a large marble fireplace always blazed. He would offer his guests rare whiskies and imported cigars. The food served during the earlier dinner, prepared by a private chef, was always exquisite but sometimes featured strange flavors. When asked about an unusual herb or spice, Samuel would smile enigmatically and mention experimental varietals he was cultivating in his greenhouse, plants bred to adapt to extreme conditions. Yet, the whispers still clung to the Marwood family, like the thick Hollow Bay fog. Why did the workers at the Marwood mill never strike or demand their rights, while other mills were in constant turmoil? Why did Samuel insist on investing in the dangerous cave system under Blackthorn Cliff, a place the sailors called the teeth of the deep sea? And what happened on those moonless nights when Blackthorn Manor fell dark and even the most loyal housekeepers were not permitted near the cliff's edge? Our story truly begins with the arrival of Dr. Evelyn Harper in Hollow Bay in the summer of 1885. A botanist trained at Radcliffe College, Evelyn had come to this coastal region in search of unique ecosystems, an opportunity to escape the constraints of Boston society and pursue her scientific passion. She was known in academic circles for her bold research on plant adaptation, and her theories about life's ability to exist in the most extreme conditions had unsettled some of her more conservative colleagues. Evelyn was a woman of science in an era when the field was still dominated by men. Her field notes, found years later in a private collection, reveal a sharp intellect that refused to accept easy answers. "Nature always conceals laws that are beyond our current understanding," she wrote. "A plant that can thrive on barren rock or in eternal darkness That is not a miracle, but a biological mechanism we have yet to discover, and any mechanism, once understood, can be harnessed. In appearance, Evelyn possessed an intelligent and independent beauty, tall with brown hair pinned up neatly so as not to interfere with her work. She dressed in a practical and elegant manner, favoring simple but well-tailored walking dresses. Her hands, though slender, were deft and steady when using analytical instruments. But her most striking feature was her eyes, hazel and filled with curiosity, never missing a detail, from the vein on a leaf to a fleeting expression on a person's face. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to proving her worth in a world that did not always welcome ambitious women. Evelyn had set up a temporary laboratory in a rented warehouse near the docks, where her extensive knowledge of botany and her enthusiasm quickly attracted the attention of Hollow Bay's small intellectual community. Her methods of classifying and preserving specimens, combining European techniques with her own innovations, produced impressive results. She was particularly successful in identifying rare species of algae and lichen on the cliffs, species that previous naturalists had overlooked. If the locals sometimes saw her working late with strange lights emanating from her lab, they simply attributed it to the eccentricity of a scientist from the big city. It was at an exhibition of industry and science at the town hall that she first met the Marwood family. The event was intended to celebrate the progress of Hollow Bay, bringing together the region's leading industrialists and inventors. The grand hall was splendidly decorated, the light from newly installed electric bulbs reflecting off polished machinery and models of inventions. Engineers and investors gathered in groups, excitedly discussing more efficient steam engines and new weaving processes. Samuel Marwood stood at the center of attention, not just because of his wealth, though that was considerable, but because of a powerful aura that seemed to set him apart from the crowd. While other industrialists boasted about profits and efficiency, Samuel spoke of the future, of possibilities beyond current understanding. Evelyn observed him with the objective assessment of a scientist. His vest, jet black, was perfectly tailored. At his wrist, his silver pocket watch peeked out, and Evelyn, with her keen eye, noticed that the symbols on it bore a strange resemblance to the geometric shapes she had seen in her dreams after coming into contact with the black flower. Evelyn found herself drawn toward him like a planet pulled into the orbit of a great star. When their eyes met across the room, she felt a strange sensation, an intellectual connection, and an indescribable shiver. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that they were both outsiders in this world, people who saw beyond the surface of reality. Whatever it was, it compelled her to approach, not to join the business conversation, but to ask about the famous gardens of Blackthorn Manor. Their conversation became the highlight of the evening for Evelyn. The powerful businessman and the independent female scientist stood beside a complex loom model, but their discussion went far beyond gears and shuttles. They barely spoke of industry, instead exchanging ideas about evolution and the limits of human knowledge. When the conversation paused, Samuel smiled, a rare and meaningful expression that surprisingly animated his cold face. "You are not like other scientists, Dr. Harper," he said, his voice deep and weighty. "You see beyond what can be measured and classified." "And what lies beyond that, Mr. Marwood?" she asked. Captivated, a vaster reality that our science has only just begun to touch. He glanced around at the other inventors. These men are content to improve their machines, believing they are mastering the world. But there are natural laws, cosmic forces, that we are only beginning to recognize. His deep-set blue eyes returned to hers. "I think you sense this as well." Before she could respond, a member of the town council approached, interrupting their conversation to congratulate Samuel on the success of his mill. Samuel replied politely, but his eyes suggested he knew exactly who Evelyn was and her purpose in coming to Hollow Bay. In the following days, Evelyn found herself constantly thinking about Samuel Marwood. His enigmatic words had stirred her own curiosity about unexplained phenomena. She had come to Hollow Bay to study known plant species, but now she wondered if there were other life forms, entirely new biological laws waiting to be discovered. Perhaps Samuel Marwood, with his obvious interest in the unusual, could be the key to accessing those secrets, or perhaps he was part of the secret himself. She began to look for excuses to visit Blackthorn Manor, ostensibly to request permission to conduct research in his forests, but really to learn more about this mysterious family. Her first visit was in response to an unexpected invitation. Samuel Marwood had sent a message inviting her to see his gardens and greenhouse, saying he was very impressed with her work. Evelyn arrived at the manor on a cloudy afternoon, the air carrying the scent of damp earth and the strange fragrance of the garden's flowers. A butler met her at the door, an elderly man with an expressionless face and stiff, mechanical movements. His eyes seemed vacant, looking at Evelyn without a hint of a welcoming expression. When he spoke, his voice was a monotone, lacking the warm cadence typical of New Englanders. "The master is waiting for you in the library, Doctor," he said, the words polite but cold. "Please, follow me." As Evelyn walked through the manor, she noticed the oppressive silence. A house this large should have been filled with the footsteps of servants, the clinking of porcelain, the 100 small sounds of daily life. Blackthorn Manor, in contrast, seemed to swallow all sound. The thick Persian rugs and heavy velvet curtains created a solemn and somewhat funereal atmosphere, more like a museum than a home. Samuel Marwood's library was an impressive space, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves filled with rare books. The large windows overlooked the garden, but the dim afternoon light was obscured by clouds, casting the room in shadow. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and a faint scent of dried herbs that Evelyn couldn't identify. Samuel was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at his garden. His black hair seemed untouched by time, and his tall frame exuded a quiet power. "Dr. Harper," he said without turning, his voice surprisingly strong in the stillness of the room. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation." Evelyn entered, her bag of research tools seeming out of place in the formal space. "Mr. Marwood, the honor is mine. I am very interested in learning more about the unique plants you are cultivating." "Among my other interests," he replied, finally turning. His blue eyes assessed her with a perspicacity that made her feel uneasy. "But I have a feeling your interests have already gone beyond what can be found in textbooks." The subsequent discussion was unlike any academic exchange Evelyn had ever had. Samuel answered her questions with philosophical statements that seemed designed to probe rather than explain. When she asked about the origin of a climbing plant with spiral-shaped leaves, he smiled and said, "Origin is such a limited concept. Don't you agree, Doctor? What we consider a beginning may just be a point in an endless cycle." When she asked about the chemical composition of the black flower, he described it as the matter of the space between stars, seeking a familiar form. Throughout the conversation, Evelyn had the distinct impression that she was the one being studied, not the plants. Samuel observed her every reaction with those deep-set blue eyes, seeming to note her curiosity and her skepticism. At one point, he showed her a small, polished meteorite fragment. When she held it, she felt a slight vibration and a cold that chilled her to the bone. "Your energy has an unusual focus, Doctor," he remarked. "It suggests a disciplined mind, or perhaps a mind capable of resonating with unusual frequencies." Samuel seemed captivated by Evelyn's intellect, inviting her to stay for tea and continue their discussion. It was during that afternoon that Evelyn first noticed the peculiarities of Blackthorn Manor. Samuel drank a tea that was a deep purple color, served in a porcelain cup with no pattern but a strange geometric shape that Evelyn did not recognize. The butler moved with an almost unnatural silence, his eyes always fixed on the floor, never making eye contact. And most unsettlingly, Evelyn could have sworn that when she glanced at a decorative crystal ball on the table, Samuel's reflection seemed to blur and distort for a moment before returning to normal. Afterward, Samuel showed her his library. It was a remarkable room, its walls lined with books on astronomy, physics, and botany, along with ancient texts that Evelyn recognized but could not read. Old Latin, runes, and other alphabets with characters completely foreign to her. The shelves reached from floor to ceiling, accessible by a sturdy wooden ladder that Samuel climbed with surprising agility for a man of his age when retrieving volumes to illustrate his arguments. Glass cases displayed objects that would astound any scientist. Meteorite fragments with a glass-smooth surface that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Complex brass instruments, with dials and lenses arranged in an incomprehensible logic. Fossils of plants unlike anything in the geological record, and most strikingly, a dark metal sphere that felt cold and vibrated slightly to the touch. Its surface was engraved with complex geometric lines, spiraling into a hypnotic pattern. Wrapped around its stand was a thin silver wire, engraved with symbols similar to those on Samuel's watch. The library smelled of old books, polished wood, and a faint hint of ozone, creating a deeply academic atmosphere that contrasted with the strangeness of the objects within. A fire burned in the large stone fireplace, though the afternoon was not cold, casting dancing shadows on the intricately patterned carpet. Samuel invited Evelyn to sit in one of two leather armchairs positioned before the hearth, then poured 2 glasses of sherry from a crystal decanter. "You have a formidable intellect, Dr. Harper," Samuel observed, settling into the other chair. "Radcliffe is known for its science program, of course, but I sense your studies have gone beyond what is accepted in the textbooks." Evelyn sipped her sherry, considering her response. The wine had a complex flavor, both sweet and strangely mineral. "I have always believed that science must be willing to explore the unknown in order to advance," she said carefully. "Some of my theories in Boston were considered too radical. Radical enough to make your colleagues uncomfortable, I understand." Samuel smiled, a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "You need not worry. The thinking in Hollow Bay is far more practical than in Boston. Here, a person of vision can pursue their ideas without being limited by old prejudices." He leaned forward, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Tell me, Doctor, have you found any anomalies in the local flora since your arrival?" The question put Evelyn on guard. She had been discreet about her most radical theories, sharing them only with her closest colleagues. "I'm not sure what you're alluding to, Mr. Marwood, but I make it a habit to learn about interesting minds that come to Hollow Bay," Samuel interrupted smoothly, "especially those who might appreciate the kind of knowledge I have collected." He gestured to the shelves and cases around them. "These objects contain answers to questions that mainstream science has not yet dared to ask. Secrets about the origin of life, about the structure of space-time, about the forms of existence this universe might contain." "You have a truly astounding collection, Mr. Marwood," Evelyn remarked, pointing to a particularly unusual item. A dark crystal of perfect shape, seemingly cut by an intelligence rather than by nature. The crystal seemed to absorb the surrounding light, creating a small point of darkness in the bright room. Though no larger than an egg, it possessed a strange gravity that made it impossible to look away. "Ah, yes," Samuel replied, his voice low and meaningful, "a specimen from a very distant source. It is said to be a storage device, a library from a vanished civilization. This universe is filled with such relics, you know. Ancient civilizations, great intelligences." He lifted the crystal from its stand, holding it with a reverence that was almost devotional. "This particular structure resonates with other dimensions, with passages between worlds. The ancient philosophers called them celestial spheres, but perhaps they are just other physical realities." Samuel handed the crystal to Evelyn, who was surprised by its weight and the cold that radiated from it, despite the burning fireplace. As her fingers touched its smooth surface, she felt a subtle vibration, as if the molecular structure within was rearranging itself. For just a moment, she thought she heard a faint whisper in her mind, a string of sounds that were not words, but the impression vanished when she blinked. "An incredible structure," Evelyn whispered, returning the unsettling object to Samuel. "The precision of its angles suggests a technology far beyond ours." "Indeed." Samuel placed the crystal back in its case with evident care. These ancient intelligences possessed an understanding that would astonish our so-called advanced society. They understood that the reality we perceive is merely a thin slice of a multidimensional universe, that there are life forms and energies that exist beyond our normal sensory perception. He smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. "Do you believe in extraterrestrial life, Dr. Harper?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Evelyn felt she was at a critical juncture. One path led to safe, scientific answers, the other into a territory of hypotheses that could be dangerous, but also revolutionary. Her scientific skepticism warred with an irresistible curiosity. "I believe," she said finally, "that this universe is vaster and more complex than our current physics can explain. Whether the entities you refer to are sentient life forms or simply energy phenomena that we lack the tools to measure, that remains an open question." Samuel's smile widened, a smile of appreciation. A cautious answer. Doctor, but I think both you and I know that some questions can only be answered through direct observation. He raised his glass to the boundaries that must be crossed and to new discoveries. Before Evelyn could respond, a young man burst into the library, his face pale with alarm. He looked like Samuel, but his self-assurance had been replaced by unconcealed fear. He was wearing an expensive but disheveled suit, and his carefully combed hair was now in disarray. Evelyn recognized him as Julian, Samuel's eldest son, who was rumored to have run away. "Father," Julian said, his voice trembling, "there's been an incident in the caverns. The equipment demands. It's unstable. We can't wait." The change in Samuel was immediate and striking. The urbane intellectual vanished, replaced by something sharper and more powerful. His eyes narrowed, their deep blue seeming to deepen, almost black in the firelight. His posture became ramrod straight, the relaxed comfort of moments before giving way to an intense focus that reminded Evelyn of a commander facing a crisis. "What kind of incident?" Samuel asked, his voice low and cold as ice. Julian glanced at Evelyn, clearly unwilling to speak in front of a stranger. One of the energy sources had an unusual reaction to the calibration process. The foreman attempted the usual stabilization procedures, but they failed. "I see." Samuel set his sherry glass down decisively. "The timing, just now. The foreman says the fluctuation is unprecedented." Julian's voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying a panic he was trying to suppress. A frown creased Samuel's brow, a flicker of cold calculation. "Not worry. Very well. Excuse me, doctor. Julian will keep you company." With that, he strode swiftly from the room, his steps decisive and purposeful, leaving a tense silence in the library. Julian went to the sherry decanter, his hands visibly shaking as he poured himself a full glass. Unlike his father, Julian had the look of a man constantly on edge, lacking Samuel's ironclad confidence. While Samuel moved with absolute control, Julian's gestures were somewhat hurried and restless, betraying an easily agitated temperament. His eyes, also blue but a paler shade than his father's, darted towards Evelyn as if she were part of the problem. He drained the glass in one gulp, then immediately refilled it. The sherry seemed to calm his trembling only slightly. Finally, he turned to Evelyn, attempting a social smile that came across as strained and grim. "So, you're the scientist my father invited," Julian said abruptly, sinking into the chair his father had just vacated. "He mentioned your work. I am very impressed with Mr. Marwood's collection," Evelyn replied cautiously, sensing the undercurrent of hostility from Julian. "My father has many impressive things," Julian muttered, a sound full of bitterness. "Too many, some might say. He's always looking for things beyond the pale." He studied Evelyn with narrowed eyes. "What exactly is your purpose in Hollow Bay, Doctor?" "My purpose is entirely scientific," Evelyn answered professionally. "I am studying the unique flora of this region. I have no other intentions." Julian refilled his glass again. "A word of advice, Doctor. There are things about this family's business you would not want to know, things that would disturb your scientific worldview. It would be best for you to focus on your flowers and stay away from my father's experiments." The warning was clear, but it only stoked Evelyn's curiosity. What experiments was Julian referring to? What aspects of Samuel's work would trouble a scientist? Before she could frame a response that might elicit more information without seeming confrontational, a sound broke the tense atmosphere. A low, sustained metallic scream echoed from somewhere beneath the manor, followed by a powerful hum so intense that the floor vibrated slightly. It was not the sound of ordinary factory machinery, not the chugging of a steam engine or the whirring of looms. This was a strange, low-frequency sound, a resonance of compressed energy, a noise that made the glass objects on the table tremble slightly and created an uncomfortable pressure in the ears. The sound lasted for about 10 seconds, seeming to pass through stone and wood, then cut off so abruptly that the subsequent silence became heavy and menacing, as if the air had just been sucked out. Julian's sherry glass clinked softly against the table. The pale yellow liquid sloshed out in a small trail on the polished wood. The faint, sweet smell of the alcohol rose to mingle with the library's scent of old books. Julian paid no mind to the spill. his eyes fixed on the door leading to the cellars, towards the caves. "What was that?" Evelyn asked, straightening up, her scientific instincts urging her to investigate the source of this strange physical phenomenon, whatever energy source had created the vibration. "Nothing," Julian answered too quickly, his voice higher than usual. "Probably one of the pumps in the greenhouse. A technical malfunction. Nothing for you to concern yourself with, Doctor." But his hand gripped the arm of the chair, belying his casual explanation. "That was no pump," Evelyn insisted. "That frequency. It wasn't mechanical. A large amount of energy is being released. As a scientist, You should finish your sherry and prepare to return to your inn," Julian interrupted, his tone hardening. "It's getting dark, and the fog on the cliffs can be very dangerous. Our foreman will see to any technical issues in the manor." The tension between them became palpable. Evelyn knew she was being dismissed, that pressing the issue would likely end any chance of returning to Blackthorn Manor. Yet, that strange sound had awakened every investigative instinct she possessed, along with a deep concern that Samuel's experiments could be dangerous. Someone or something in this manor was operating a device far beyond their control, and Julian's clumsy lie suggested the family's involvement. "I think perhaps I should speak with your father before I depart," Evelyn said carefully. "If there has been a serious technical incident, my father is busy and cannot be disturbed." Julian cut in, rising from his chair with a hurried motion. "I insist, Doctor. Your carriage will be brought around immediately." Evelyn had to concede, realizing that further resistance would only make them more wary. Julian summoned the butler to escort her to the front of the manor, where a small carriage was already waiting. Night had fallen, and a thick fog had rolled in from the sea, blanketing the landscape in a ghostly, milky white. The dim carriage lanterns could only illuminate a small patch of the path, and the darkness seemed to be swallowing the road ahead. As she was about to step into the carriage, a movement from the garden caught her attention. A figure in a dark cloak darted out from behind the bushes, hurrying towards her. It was Clara, her cloak obscuring most of her face in the lantern light. Her dark hair, usually pinned up neatly, now had a few loose strands flying in the damp sea breeze, giving her the appearance of someone in flight. "Dr. Harper," she called softly, glancing back towards the manor, as if afraid of being discovered. "Please, just a moment." Evelyn gestured for the driver to wait and met Clara in the shadows beside the carriage. Up close, she could see Clara's eyes were wide with fear. Her breathing was uneven, and her hands were ice-cold. Most striking was a strange scent that emanated from her. Beneath the faint smell of lavender was something else, a sharp ozone scent, like the air after a lightning strike. "Miss Marwood," Evelyn began, "I heard a strange noise. Is everything all right?" "You must not come here again," Clara whispered, her eyes constantly darting towards the manor, where a light had just turned on in a window. "My father, the things he does, you cannot know. Please, for your own safety, leave Hollow Bay." Her fingers gripped Evelyn's arm with a desperate strength, her nails digging into the fabric of Evelyn's sleeve. Up close, in the lantern light, Evelyn noticed something she had missed before, a small tattoo behind Clara's ear, partially hidden by her hair. It was a geometric symbol, a circle with intersecting lines, identical to one of the symbols on Samuel's watch. "Clara," Evelyn said softly, her concern overriding formality. "Are you in danger? If your father is hurting you?" Clara shook her head, a bitter smile flashing across her lips. "Hurting me? No, Doctor. He is preparing me. All of us are being prepared." Her gaze shifted over Evelyn's shoulder towards the cliff where the cave system lay beneath. "But not everyone is ready for the transformation. Not everyone is chosen." "What transformation?" "Clara, you're not making sense." Evelyn placed her hands on the girl's shoulders, trying to calm her. Under the thin cloak, she could feel Clara trembling. "The covenant," she whispered, leaning closer, her lips almost brushing Evelyn's ear. "The veil crossers demand a connection in exchange for their knowledge. Father has promised them a perfect vessel on the next new moon. Tonight was just a test." She pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting Evelyn's with desperate urgency. "He sees something in you, Doctor. A strong mind. If he invites you to an observation, refuse. No matter what he promises, no matter how tempting the knowledge, refuse." With those cryptic words, Clara rushed back into the darkness, leaving Evelyn more intrigued than frightened. As the carriage took her back to her inn through the fog-shrouded streets, she was determined to discover the secrets the Marwood family was hiding at Blackthorn Manor. Clara's warning, instead of scaring her away, had awakened the same scientific spirit that had brought her to Hollow Bay, a need to understand the natural laws behind strange phenomena, no matter how disturbing those laws might be. The ride back to the inn that night was eerily quiet. The fog was so thick it swallowed the sound of the wheels and the horses' hooves. Several times, Evelyn had the distinct feeling that the carriage was not alone, that figures were moving parallel to them in the mist, just a few feet beyond the lantern light. Once, a dark shape darted in front of the carriage, causing the horse to rear up and whinny in fear. But when the driver looked out, he saw nothing but a wall of white fog. She arrived at the inn near midnight. The harbour area was nearly deserted, with only a dim light coming from a tavern, the Weary Mariner. As she was about to enter the inn, the tavern door flew open, and a man stumbled out, collapsing onto the stone pavement, right in front of Evelyn. Evelyn rushed to check on the man. In the faint light from the inn's window, she could see he was a sailor, his clothes stained with grease and smelling of fish. His face was bruised, and a cut on his forehead was bleeding. But what caught Evelyn's attention was the expression of absolute terror in his eyes. "Help me," the man gasped, clutching at the hem of Evelyn's dress. "They're looking for me. They know I saw." "On the ship." "Saw what?" Evelyn asked, glancing towards the tavern. Two men stood in the doorway, their figures tall and silent in the fog. They just stood there watching, making no move to approach. Their stillness was unnatural, as if they weren't tavern brawlers, but predators in waiting. "The ship," the sailor whispered. "Marwood's ship, the one that unloads at a private dock at night. I was on watch last night, saw them moving the crates. Not cotton, not textiles, the crates. They were moving. They were moaning. Something worse than smuggling." His eyes darted past Evelyn, widening further. "They're here. God help me. They're here." Evelyn turned to see the two men had advanced from the tavern, moving with the same silence and purpose she had seen in the butler at Blackthorn Manor. Their faces were lost in shadow, but their tall figures exuded menace. One of them held a thick coil of rope. Standing up, Evelyn placed herself between the two men and the injured sailor. "This man needs medical attention," she said firmly. "I am Dr. Evelyn Harper, and I am taking him with me." The two men stopped, their presence heavy in the fog. One of them spoke, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone, just like the butler's. "This doesn't concern you, Doctor." The old man was causing a disturbance. "We are just taking him back to his ship." "His injuries suggest otherwise," Evelyn replied, helping the sailor to his feet. "If he has broken the law, report it to the sheriff. Until then, I will be responsible for him." For a moment, it seemed the confrontation might turn dangerous. The two men took another step forward, their figures completely blocking the light from the tavern. Evelyn tensed, acutely aware that she was facing men who were far from ordinary, and she was alone. The sailor trembled beside her, clearly too terrified to defend himself. Then, unexpectedly, the two men stepped back. "As you wish, Doctor," the man said, his tone unchanged. "But Mr. Marwood will hear of your misplaced concern." With that, they turned and melted back into the fog, vanishing as quickly and silently as ghosts. Evelyn helped the sailor into the inn, then had the innkeeper help her get him to her room. Once they were inside with the door locked, the sailor was nearly incoherent, muttering about things in the crates and the green light under the water. After cleaning his wounds and giving him some water, Evelyn examined him more closely. The external injuries were not too severe, consistent with a scuffle, but his pulse was very weak, and his skin was ice-cold. Most disturbing was his pulse, which was unusually faint, and on his wrist she discovered a small bruise, shaped like a circle with intersecting lines, the symbol she had seen on Samuel's watch and behind Clara's ear. Evelyn gave the sailor a mild sedative, then sat at her small table to record the evening's events while they were still fresh. As she wrote, connections began to form in her mind. Samuel Marwood's strange behavior, the mechanical state of his employees, Clara's cryptic warnings, and now this sailor's terror and his silent pursuers. Something was happening at Blackthorn Manor that defied all scientific explanation, something that was clearly linked to Marwood's shipping operations. The following week, Evelyn had a chance encounter with Mr. Henderson, a supplier of equipment to many of the local mills. including Marwood's. Henderson suffered from a chronic bad back and was at the local apothecary, where Evelyn was also purchasing some chemicals. As they waited, the conversation turned to the Marwood family. Henderson was a middle-aged, talkative man with the sharp eyes of a salesman who missed little. His company supplied everything from loom parts to lubricating oil and dyes. Unlike other suppliers who specialized in one area, Henderson dealt in anything that could be sold, earning him a reputation for being resourceful and knowing everything that went on in town. "This blasted back," Henderson muttered, rubbing his lower spine. "Age and heavy lifting get to us all." He glanced at Evelyn. "Except for Samuel Marwood. I swear the man hasn't aged a day in 15 years. Evelyn smiled politely. "Perhaps he leads a healthy lifestyle." "Healthy?" Henderson scoffed. "He works non-stop and lives in a damp manor on a cliff. That's not a recipe for youth." He lowered his voice. "Strange folk, that whole family. Been supplying them for nearly 2 decades, and I still don't understand how they do it." "Do what?" Evelyn asked, keeping her tone casual while her interest sharpened. Here, perhaps, was another piece of the Marwood family puzzle. "Their success," Henderson replied, leaning against the counter. "Samuel came here with some capital, yes, but not enough to build an empire that fast. Now look at him, one of the wealthiest men in New England. And during the Depression, when everyone else was going bankrupt, Marwood's mill was expanding production. It's not natural." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully, pretending to examine a jar of ointment on the shelf. "I've heard Mr. Marwood is a very shrewd businessman." Henderson snorted, a sound of profound skepticism. "Shrewd is one thing, this is something else. His ships are never late. His machines never break down. His investments always, and I mean always, succeed. During the Depression, when most of us were selling off assets, he somehow secured the most lucrative government contracts. He should have been investigated for monopoly, but instead, he became a pillar of the community." The supplier leaned forward, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard in the crowded apothecary. "And have you noticed the man hardly ages? I swear he looks the same now as he did 10 years ago. My grandfather used to tell stories about alchemists who found the philosopher's stone. Sometimes I wonder, surely you don't believe in such things," Evelyn said with a forced smile, though her mind was racing with the possible implications. Her own research into unusually resilient plants had led her to consider biological possibilities beyond common understanding. While she dismissed unscientific ideas, some natural laws remained a mystery. "Maybe not," Henderson admitted, straightening up. "I'm a practical man, Doctor. I deal in gears and oil, things you can see and touch. But there's something else, something that happened back in 2081 that always bothered me. There was a big strike at the mills in the region. Someone informed on the leaders and they were arrested. Most were fired and blacklisted, never found work again." He paused, rubbing his chin. "But the ones from Marwood's mill, Samuel insisted on dealing with them himself. Took them to do a special project at his cliffside property. No one saw those men again, but for weeks afterward, people saw strange lights coming from the caves day and night, and a smell." Henderson shuddered. "The smell wasn't of machines or oil, Doctor. It was something else. A sharp ozone smell, like the air right after a lightning strike, but persistent and cloying." Evelyn finished her shopping in silence, her mind racing. As a scientist, she was reluctant to accept irrational explanations. Yet, she had seen enough at Blackthorn Manor, the butler's mechanical behavior, Samuel's strange reflection, the unusually colored tea, and the symbols to know that something beyond conventional understanding was occurring. Whether it involved an unknown advanced technology or a dangerous scientific discovery, she couldn't yet determine. But the pattern of disappearances centered around the caves suggested that whatever the Marwoods were doing, it involved human subjects. The sailor's terrified words echoed in her mind. Not cotton, not textiles. The crates. They were moving. Something worse. Was the Marwood family using people for their experiments? And what was the preparation Clara had mentioned, with a perfect vessel on the next new moon? That evening, Evelyn wrote a letter to a former colleague at Radcliffe, asking about any research into anomalous biological phenomena or reports of unidentified life forms in the New England region. While she waited for a reply, she continued her local investigations, speaking with anyone who had dealings with the Marwood family, from a clerk at the docks She learned that Marwood's ships often made trips that were not on the official schedule, and when they returned, they were often unloaded at night by a private crew of Marwood's own men, not the usual dock workers. From an elderly retired nurse, she heard that the late Mrs. Marwood, Ilara, had seemed not to age at all during her years in Hollow Bay, and that before her death she had become extremely paranoid and had strange bruises on her body, bruises shaped like geometric symbols. Most disturbing was her conversation with Mr. Theron, the old lighthouse keeper who had looked after the lighthouse before Samuel Marwood bought it. Theron was a grizzled old man who lived alone in a small shack at the edge of town, his hands calloused from years of hauling ropes and battling storms. Despite his reclusive life, his mind was sharp, and his eyes, grey as the sea, seemed to have seen a great deal. Evelyn found him mending a fishing net on his porch. "Samuel Marwood," Theron muttered when Evelyn mentioned the name, his fingers never ceasing their work. "A name I try not to think about, not since what happened to Peterson." "Peterson?" Evelyn asked, the name entirely new to her. "Eric Peterson," Theron clarified, looking up and squinting at Evelyn. "A geologist from Boston. He came around the same time as Marwood, in 2065. They were partners at first, surveying the cliff and the caves together." This was new information. In all the gossip, no one had mentioned Samuel having a partner when he first arrived. "What happened to him?" Evelyn asked. Theron's eyes grew distant, looking out towards the sea. They were close at first, exploring the caves together, but after about a year, Peterson disappeared. Marwood said he'd taken a job in California, but there were rumors that Peterson had discovered something in the caves, something Marwood wanted to keep for himself, and he had threatened to report it. "What kind of discovery?" Evelyn pressed, feeling she was finally getting to the heart of the mystery. Theron shook his head, his gaze distant. "I don't know for sure, but just before he vanished, Peterson came to me, looking terrified. He talked about structures in the caves, things that weren't natural. He claimed Marwood had found something from a collision long ago. Not a meteorite, but a technology, a way to communicate with things out there. He was scared, Doctor, truly scared." The old lightkeeper's voice dropped to a whisper. A week later, his boat was found adrift offshore, with no sign of its owner. Marwood said he'd sold the boat and gone west, but I've always wondered. Theron fell silent, his calloused hands tightening on the net. After a moment, he continued, his voice steadier. "Peterson left something with me for safekeeping, a set of geological maps and notes. He said if anything happened, I should make sure it got to scientists in Boston. But when I tried to get in touch after he disappeared, my office at the lighthouse was broken into. The lock on my cabinet was forced, and only that portfolio was taken." "Do you remember anything specific from Peterson's notes?" Evelyn asked. "Any terms or drawings that might help me understand what Marwood found?" Theron hesitated, glancing out to sea as if weighing old memories. Finally, he nodded. Peterson mentioned a group. He called them the Nebula Order. He said Marwood was a high-ranking member from before he came here. This order didn't worship, but communicated with entities they called the Veil Crossers. Their ultimate goal was evolution, achieving immortality through technologies Peterson considered incredibly dangerous. "And you believe Marwood continues these activities in the caves?" Evelyn asked, trying to connect this information with what she had observed. "I can't say for sure," Theron replied carefully. "But I've never gone near that cliff since he bought it. There's something in that man's eyes, Doctor. A coldness that isn't of this world." He looked directly at Evelyn. "If you're investigating Marwood, be extremely careful. The power he wields may not be supernatural, but it's very real. His influence runs through this town, into the harbor, the mills, and even the sheriff's office." As Evelyn left Theron's shack, the old lightkeeper's warning echoed in her mind. She had come to Hollow Bay seeking scientific discoveries, a chance to push the boundaries of traditional botany. Instead, she had stumbled upon a mystery that hinted at technologies and life forms far beyond her wildest imagination. A few weeks later, Evelyn received a response from her colleague at Radcliffe. Her friend wrote that there were indeed records of anomalous phenomena in New England, particularly 17th century reports of falling stars and millenarian cults. He enclosed copies of several documents, including a little-known scientific article from an amateur astronomy journal dated 1852. The article described a group called the Nebula Order, who believed in communicating with intelligences from the stars, who had seeded life on Earth before recorded history. The article was written cautiously, but its implications were clear. Evelyn spent the entire night poring over it, comparing the astronomical charts with the symbols she had seen. What emerged was a disturbing document, the record of an amateur astronomer who had approached the Nebula Order with scientific curiosity, only to realize their true nature and hastily withdraw. According to the article, the order was founded in Europe but had established a strong branch in New England by the mid-19th century. They operated under the guise of a scientific and philosophical society, attracting radical thinkers who were dissatisfied with the limits of mainstream science. However, their true nature was far from philosophical. They speak of life forms that existed before the Earth cooled. The article recorded intelligences of a scale and age that human concepts of time and space are meaningless to them. These veil crossers, as the order calls them, are said to exist in other dimensions, separated by a frequency, veil, that can be weakened under certain conditions. The experiments I witnessed involved attempts to create such conditions, to open gates that the laws of physics seem to have sealed. The article described rituals conducted during specific astronomical events, like major meteor showers, when the Earth's magnetic field was affected. These rituals always involved the use of biological conductors, initially strange plants, but eventually human subjects, often immigrant workers or nameless sailors, whose disappearances would raise few questions among local authorities. Most disturbing were the accounts of what happened when the experiments succeeded. Something responded, the author wrote. I cannot describe its nature, as it seemed to be a pure consciousness, a pattern of energy that shifted and changed constantly. Those who were exposed to it directly collapsed, bleeding from their noses and ears due to the psychic pressure. Yet, a prominent industrialist, Mr. M, approached it without fear, using a silver resonance device. In return, the consciousness touched his mind, leaving a permanent change, an understanding far beyond human. According to the article, the order's activities became more secretive after an experiment in rural Massachusetts went catastrophically wrong, resulting in several local people being exposed to strange energy and going mad. Although no one was convicted, the public scrutiny forced the Nebula Order to operate more covertly. Most disturbing was the description of the order's inner circle consuming an extract from a black plant, which was said to slow the aging process and enhance psychic communication with the entities. The extract, prepared on the new moon and mixed with certain other catalysts, was said to gradually transform those who used it regularly. They become something not entirely human anymore, the author wrote. Their outward appearance doesn't change much, except for a strange agelessness, but their neural structure is irreversibly altered. Their dreams are no longer their own, but glimpses into other worlds. They hunger for knowledge beyond human understanding, and they always hear the echo of the veil crossers, promising evolution and knowledge in exchange for service and connection. The article ended abruptly, with an editor's note stating that the author had died suddenly of nervous exhaustion shortly after submitting the manuscript. Accompanying it was a letter from Evelyn's colleague. I need not remind you, my dear Evelyn, he wrote, that our understanding of consciousness and its connection to the physical universe is still in its infancy. The mind may be a receiver for realities our senses cannot perceive. Whether the entities described here have an objective existence or are merely hallucinations caused by a powerful psychotropic agent, I cannot say for sure, but I urge you to be extremely cautious. Knowledge that can change our fundamental reality can be as dangerous as it is precious, especially when it is held by those who would use it for their own purposes. That night, Evelyn dreamed of Samuel Marwood. In the dream, he stood by a pool of black water, sparkling with starlight, though they were in a cave. When she approached, Samuel turned to her, and his face began to transform, the skin seeming to melt away to reveal a complex pattern of light, a map of moving constellations beneath. From the center of that map, tendrils of light reached towards her, promising an understanding of the universe, of life and death. She woke up, drenched in sweat, the image still burning in her mind. Outside the window, the sound of a ship's horn signaled the coming dawn, a mundane sound that contrasted with the horror of her dream. As she rose and prepared for another day of research, Evelyn knew that despite her growing unease, she could not abandon her investigation. Too many mysteries needed to be brought to light. Despite her growing unease, Evelyn couldn't stay away from Blackthorn Manor. She continued to find excuses to visit the surrounding area to collect samples, hoping to observe more. Each trip yielded small but significant details: geometric symbols subtly carved into the iron gates, patterns on the courtyard tiles that bore a strange resemblance to the astronomical diagrams in Samuel's books, and an indescribable cold that emanated from the ground near the cliff. She tried to find a way to approach the caves, but they were always heavily guarded by tight-lipped workers who seemed to appear from nowhere whenever she got too close. These men, with their vacant eyes and somewhat rigid movements, would gently but firmly direct her back to the main path. Her interactions with the Marwood family made no further progress. Samuel seemed to be always busy with business in Boston or other cities. Julian had disappeared once again, and Clara, who had pleaded for help, now seemed to be deliberately avoiding her. Evelyn sometimes caught the girl looking at her from a high window, with a look of fear and resignation. It was during one such trip late in the summer that Evelyn met Clara again. Unlike last time, this time Clara sought her out. Evelyn was examining a species of lichen on a rock at the edge of the forest when Clara appeared, slipping through the trees like a ghost. She looked less like a wealthy heiress and more like someone in trouble. Evelyn found her sitting on a fallen log, reading a volume of Emily Dickinson's poetry. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Evelyn's approach until the sound of a dry twig snapping under Evelyn's foot. Clara, startled, hastily hiding the book as if it were a forbidden object. "Do you enjoy Dickinson's poetry?" Evelyn asked, sitting down beside her. She kept her tone gentle, recognizing in Clara a sensitive soul being held captive. Clara nodded, relaxing a little when she saw Evelyn had no intention of judging her. "I find truth in her words," she said softly, running her fingers over the book's cover. "Much madness is divinest sense. Sometimes I feel that way about what happens at Blackthorn." "How so?" Evelyn asked gently, careful not to push. The girl was clearly in great distress. Clara glanced around, making sure they were alone. "This place, it changes people," she whispered. "My father, Julian, they're not themselves anymore. They talk about a cosmic legacy, about knowledge being passed down, but I've seen the price." The young girl's face contorted with a horrific memory. "The caverns, they take people down there. I followed my father and brother one night. There was a man tied to the stone platform. They were chanting, and there were others, powerful people from town. Then something emerged from the pool of water. I couldn't see it clearly, but it had no fixed shape. It moved wrong." Clara buried her face in her hands, trembling. "It speaks to me in my dreams. It says I belong to it. My father says I'm ready for the merging. You have to help me, doctor. I need to get away from here before the next new moon. That's when they'll come for me." "When is the next new moon?" Evelyn asked, her voice serious. "Less than 2 weeks from now," Clara whispered. "They say the stars will be aligned. This ceremony will be the culmination of everything. They will receive the greatest gift, the secret of transformation, into something that doesn't age or die." She gripped Evelyn's arm. "I've seen the workers they choose for special duties. They come back empty. They just obey. I don't want to become like that." Evelyn's mind raced. This wasn't hypnosis or brainwashing. This was a change at a biological level, something that rewrote their very essence. "I will help you," she promised. But before they could say more, Julian appeared on the path, his face a cold mask. "Clara, father is looking for you," he said, his voice a monotone. "And Dr. Harper, I believe my father wished for you to no longer trespass on this property." Julian turned to Evelyn, and any trace of his previous panic was gone. "You've been asking too many questions," he said. "That is unwise." "I'm worried about Clara," Evelyn retorted, trying to remain calm. "Worried?" Julian scoffed, a cold sound. "You know nothing of our legacy. We are on the verge of evolution. My father sees potential in you. You could join us, live for centuries, possess the knowledge of the universe. At the cost of your humanity," Evelyn demanded. "Humanity is a brief stage," Julian said, his voice seeming to have a strange, inhuman resonance. "What we offer is eternal existence. Do not come here again unless you are ready to accept our path. There is no escape from our destiny." As Julian led Clara away, Evelyn knew she had to act fast. But how could one scientist stand against a cult with influence and a technology beyond comprehension? She realized she needed proof, and above all, a plan that didn't rely on confronting their power head-on. Back in town, Evelyn tried to persuade the sheriff to investigate the disappearances at the Marwood mill, but to no avail. Samuel Marwood was the town's biggest benefactor. When she spoke of human experiments and a cosmic cult, she was met with skepticism and pity. "These are serious accusations, Doctor," the sheriff said, his expression one of clear annoyance. "Mr. Marwood is one of our most respected citizens, and you expect me to believe he's conducting bizarre experiments based on the word of a hysterical young girl and the ramblings of a drunken old fisherman." He smiled condescendingly. "Perhaps the sea air isn't good for city folk. I suggest you focus on your flowers." Only when Evelyn mentioned the sailor who had witnessed the strange crates did the sheriff's demeanor change. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a cold watchfulness that reminded Evelyn of Samuel himself. "I think we've talked enough," he said, standing up. "A friendly piece of advice, Doctor. Hollow Bay is a small community. Those who succeed here understand the importance of not meddling in other people's affairs. Keep spreading these stories, and you may find you are no longer welcome here." As Evelyn left the office, she noticed a black, unmarked carriage parked across the street. The driver sat motionless, but she could feel his eyes following her. The message was clear. Marwood's influence was pervasive, and her attempts to seek help had failed. Realizing she and Isaac would have to act alone, Evelyn began to prepare. From her lab, she took some chemicals that could cause a fire and a syringe filled with a powerful sedative. She packed them carefully in a cloth bag along with bandages and a small knife. From her notes, she knew that salt and certain herbs could disrupt energy fields, so she also brought a pouch of sea salt and several dried bundles of sage. Most importantly, she and Isaac had obtained an old map of the cave system from an old fisherman who had explored them in his youth. The map showed a secret entrance on the backside of the cliff, only visible at low tide. They would use it to approach undetected. The days before the new moon passed with agonizing tension. Evelyn tried to contact Clara again through a kind-hearted maid, but there was no response. The maid reported that Clara had been confined to her room and was not allowed to see anyone. On the night of the ceremony, Evelyn and Isaac rode out to Blackthorn Cliff after midnight. She wore dark clothing, her face smudged with a bit of mud for camouflage. The night was cold and foggy, a strange silence covering the sea. Even the sound of the waves seemed muffled. They found the secret entrance, a narrow crack between wet rocks. Inside, the air was unusually warm and thick, with the smell of ozone. They moved carefully through the narrow passages, guided only by the faint light of Isaac's lantern. They heard a rhythmic chanting, not words but a resonant hum, low and steady, that seemed to emanate from the rocks themselves. The deeper they went, the more they felt a pressure weighing on their minds, a feeling of dizziness and disorientation. The chanting grew louder as they went deeper. Finally, they reached a natural stone balcony overlooking a huge cavern below. The space was illuminated by a strange blue light emanating from a large pool of water in the center. Around the pool, Evelyn recognized Samuel Marwood and about a dozen others in purple robes. They were the most powerful faces in Hollow Bay, the banker, the fleet captain, and even the sheriff who had dismissed her concerns. They were chanting in a non-human language, the resonant sounds creating a tangible pressure in the air. Evelyn felt her head spin and a wave of nausea. She realized that the frequency of the sound itself was a kind of weapon designed to weaken the will of the unprepared. She signaled to Isaac, and they both stuffed small pieces of cloth into their ears to lessen the effect. At the center of the ritual, near the pool, was Clara. She was bound to a stone platform, wearing a simple white dress, her face pale with terror. Clearly, she was the focus of whatever was about to happen. As dawn approached, the ritual seemed to be winding down. The members left one by one, their faces wearing expressions of fatigue but satisfaction. They returned to town in separate carriages, timed so as not to draw attention. Evelyn and Isaac were about to retreat when Samuel and another large man appeared, dragging an unconscious mill worker. They took the man to a dark alcove and locked him behind an iron door. On the worker's arm, Evelyn could see shallow cuts, forming the geometric symbols she had seen everywhere. They knew they had to act the following night, the night of the new moon. That was the night of the main ceremony. The next day, Evelyn couldn't rest. Her mind was filled with images of the cave, of Clara's terrified face, and the ecstatic expressions of the cult members. She reviewed her research documents, looking for any weakness. A passage in the 1852 article caught her attention. Their connection depends on stable frequency resonance. Any sudden energy disruption, such as an electromagnetic shock or a chemical change in the environment, can cause an uncontrollable backlash, shattering the gate and releasing the energy chaotically. With this knowledge, Evelyn prepared a plan. She took a mixture of chemicals from her lab, capable of creating a strong exothermic reaction upon contact with salt water. She and Isaac also brought the salt and sage and an iron crowbar, a crude tool, but potentially useful. When sleep finally came to her in the afternoon, she dreamed of the cave. She saw Clara lying on the platform, and a huge black shadow, a formless mass of energy with countless glittering eyes, was slowly rising from the pool. Samuel stood there, his arms raised, not in worship, but like a scientist conducting a great experiment. The entity extended a tendril of energy towards Clara, and Evelyn woke up with a strangled scream, the cold feeling of empty space still in her mind. On the night of the new moon, Evelyn and Isaac returned to the cliff. The fog was thick, and there was no starlight, perfect for concealment. They followed the secret entrance and entered the cave system. The rhythmic chanting and psychic pressure were even stronger than the night before. When they reached the stone balcony, the scene below was terrifying. The cavern glowed with the blue light from the pool, and dozens of figures in purple robes stood in a circle. In the center, Samuel Marwood, in a darker robe, stood before the stone platform where Clara was bound, her face white with terror. Clearly, she was the perfect vessel she had warned about. "Brothers and sisters of the Nebula Order," Samuel's voice echoed. "Tonight, the universe listens. Tonight, the veil thins and the veil crossers will answer our call. We offer them a pure connection, a mind ready to receive the knowledge of the stars." Evelyn knew they had to act immediately. She signaled to Isaac, while he used the crowbar to make a loud noise in another passage, distracting two nearby guards. Evelyn quickly slipped down a hidden slope, approaching the ritual area from behind. She saw her chance when Samuel raised the dark metal sphere she had seen in his library. The energy in the cave seemed to converge on it, and the pool of water began to bubble. "Now!" Isaac shouted, pushing a large rock down a nearby pit, creating a thunderous crash. Chows erupted. As the cult members turned towards the noise, Evelyn burst from her hiding place. She didn't use a gun, but science itself. She threw her bag of chemicals directly into the pool. Instantly, a violent reaction occurred. The water in the pool exploded into steam and blinding light. The stable blue light became chaotic, flashing and changing colors. The chanting turned into screams of terror as the energy backlashed, striking those standing closest. Several of them collapsed, convulsing. Samuel turned, his face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" he roared. But it was too late. The uncontrolled energy was shaking the entire cavern. Rocks began to fall from the ceiling. Isaac had rushed forward, using his knife to cut Clara's bonds. "Let's go," he yelled. Chaos engulfed the cavern. The chaotic energy from the pool sent the cult members reeling and screaming. Samuel stood firm, his face twisted in fury. "You fool," he roared at Evelyn. "You don't know what you've broken." Clara, freed by Isaac, ran to Evelyn's side. "You came," she gasped, her eyes a mix of terror and gratitude. "Stay behind me," Evelyn commanded, pulling out her small knife while Isaac held the crowbar steady, ready to deal with anyone who approached. "When you get a chance, run for the exit." Some of the most fanatical members, led by Julian, began to advance on them, their eyes burning with outrage. Samuel pushed them aside, striding towards Evelyn, his rage now replaced by a frightening calm. "Dr. Harper," he said, his voice cold as ice. "I overestimated you. I thought you might understand. That you could join us. I've seen enough to know what you are," Evelyn replied, backing slowly towards the exit. "Madmen trading humanity for empty promises." Samuel smiled, a chilling expression that made Evelyn shudder. "Not empty, Doctor. What we do serves evolution. The Veil Crossers reward their pioneers. They have given us knowledge, power and a life beyond biological limits. They could have given you the same. As he spoke, he raised the dark metal sphere. It began to vibrate and emit a low hum. "This is the key," he said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "It allows the mind to connect with the cosmic consciousness, to understand the laws that Newton and Darwin never dreamed of. Touch it, Doctor, and see the truth." "At what price?" Evelyn demanded, fighting the scientific curiosity that urged her to touch the sphere. "The lives of innocent people, and your own daughter's mind." "Mind?" Samuel scoffed, a dry sound. "A limited concept, Doctor. The veil crossers teach us that there is only matter and the energy that shapes it. That energy can be transformed, upgraded, preserved. What you call the mind is merely an energy pattern, and patterns can be rewritten." As he spoke, the energy in the cave became even more chaotic. The blue light flashed frantically, and an unnatural cold filled the space. A low rumbling sound echoed, causing loose stones to fall from the ceiling. "It's coming," a cult member whispered, his eyes wide with terror and adoration. "It senses the disruption." From the boiling pool something began to rise, not a body, but a distortion of space, a mass of shadow that seemed to swallow the light, glittering with eyes that were not eyes. Samuel turned back towards Clara. "We have no more time. Julian, prepare your sister. The connection must be completed." Julian, his face a mask of crazed determination, moved towards Clara, but then he hesitated, his gaze meeting his sister's horrified eyes. "Julian," Clara whispered, a faint plea. For a moment, conflict was clear on Julian's face. He looked back at his father, then at the rising entity. Then, with a desperate cry, he did not advance on Clara. Instead, he lunged for the metal sphere Samuel was still holding, trying to wrestle it away. "Stop, father, it will kill us all." Samuel roared in anger, shoving his son away. But it was too late. Julian's sudden contact had broken the fragile resonance. The sphere emitted a piercing shriek and fell to the ground. "Run!" Evelyn screamed to Isaac and Clara. The explosion of energy was not fire, but a wave of pressure and absolute silence. The pool vaporized instantly. The shadowy entity convulsed and let out a silent scream that shook the mind before being sucked back into a crack in the air, which then sealed itself. Samuel and the cult members were thrown against the stone walls. The entire cavern shook violently. As they ran out of the tunnel, Evelyn glanced back and saw the cavern ceiling collapsing, burying everything below in tons of rock. "Don't look back," Isaac yelled as they scrambled onto the boat. "Just go." They raced out of the hidden tunnel, rushing towards Isaac's small boat moored in a hidden cove. Behind them, the cavern was shaking violently. Screams and the sound of falling rock echoed from within. "Hurry!" Isaac yelled, pushing Clara onto the boat while Evelyn cut the anchor line. As they rowed away from the cliff, a powerful tremor sent a massive wave across the sea, nearly capsizing the boat. Looking back, they saw an unbelievable sight. The entire Blackthorn cliff was collapsing, but it wasn't a natural landslide. A green, unstable, and sickly light was leaking from cracks in the rock, as if a massive energy source was trying to escape. "What's happening?" Clara gasped, her face illuminated by the strange light. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted, struggling to keep the boat steady. "But we need to get as far away from here as possible." As she spoke, a terrible sound emanated from within the cliff, not an explosion, but a high-frequency shriek that was painful to the ears. The green light flared one last time, shooting a column of light through the fog into the sky. Then, with a low, guttural growl, the entire cliff collapsed into the sea, creating a massive wave that rushed towards them. Isaac and Evelyn struggled to keep the boat from being swamped. "The ritual," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "It went wrong." Julian's interference. It broke the balance. The veil crossers, they were repelled, but the energy was not. When the wave passed and the sea began to calm, they looked back. Blackthorn Manor was gone. The cliff where it had once stood was now just a jagged pile of rubble. There was no sign of life, only a dead silence and the heavy smell of ozone in the air. They rowed in silence, not slowing until they reached a small harbor in a neighboring town just before dawn. The town was waking up, fishermen preparing to go out, completely unaware of the catastrophe that had occurred just a few miles away. Evelyn took Clara to an old friend's house. where the girl nearly collapsed from exhaustion and psychic shock. Once Clara was settled, Evelyn told Isaac everything. The ritual was broken at its apex, she analyzed, her scientific mind trying to order the chaotic events. If my theory is correct, the energy released without control would have catastrophic consequences for those nearby. And for the place itself, Isaac added grimly. He was exhausted, but his eyes were still alert. Whatever Marwood woke up, it didn't like being disturbed. They didn't have to wait long for news to spread. A few days later, reports began to circulate about a strange localized earthquake that had occurred at Hollow Bay. Fishermen told of an unusually large wave and a landslide that had completely obliterated Blackthorn Manor and the cliff beneath it. Officials from Boston were sent to investigate. When they arrived, they found only a scene of utter desolation. There was no sign of the manor, the textile mill, or the people who had lived and worked there. Not a single body, not a single piece of debris. It was as if the Marwood dynasty and their entire empire had simply been erased from reality, swallowed by the sea and the stone. In the following days, with the fear of Samuel Marwood gone, the truth began to emerge. Ledgers found in his town office revealed a disturbing pattern of missing workers, secret payments to officials, and blueprints for strange machines annotated with the geometric symbols Evelyn recognized. Most shocking was the list of members of the Nebula Order, which included some of the region's most influential citizens. Many of them hastily left town immediately after the disaster. Those who remained claimed they had been deceived or coerced by Samuel, but no one believed them. The collapse of the Marwood Empire left a power vacuum and an indelible stain on Hollow Bay's reputation. Even more disturbing was a journal discovered in a secret compartment in Samuel's office, written in a complex cipher. With the help of a linguist from Boston, Evelyn managed to decode a portion of it. The journal detailed the protocols of the Nebula Order and their communication with the Veil Crossers. It described a pact Samuel had made years ago when he came into contact with an alien consciousness through a meteorite fragment. It promised knowledge and evolution in exchange for preparing a suitable environment for their presence on Earth. The journal described how Samuel, along with the geologist Eric Peterson, had identified Hollow Bay as an ideal location due to its unusual geomagnetic properties, a thin spot in the veil between dimensions. The mill system and the shipping lines provided a perfect cover for recruiting and disposing of test subjects without arousing suspicion. The Order's influence was deeper than we imagined, Isaac said to Evelyn a week after the disaster as they reviewed the investigators' reports. It explains Marwood's extraordinary success and why the officials always looked the other way. And the effects on the members themselves, Evelyn added, thinking of Samuel's ageless appearance and Julian's psychological transformation. The journal speaks of restructuring at a cellular level from prolonged exposure to their energy. The price of that knowledge was their very humanity. Clara Marwood, the family's sole survivor, was taken to Boston by Isaac. She was haunted by what had happened, by the image of Julian trying to stop his father in those final moments. Under the patronage of a distant family, she gradually found peace, dedicating her life to art as a way to create beauty in opposition to the horror she had experienced. She never married, determined to let the Marwood bloodline end with her. As for Dr. Evelyn Harper, she remained in Hollow Bay only long enough to provide her testimony to the investigators. Her account, combined with the decoded journal and the statements of those involved, formed an official report that was subsequently and secretly sealed by the government. Haunted by what she had witnessed, a scientific reality far beyond her wildest imagination, Evelyn returned to Boston. She continued her research, but her focus had shifted from conventional botany to a new field she called xenobiology, studying the possibility of life being influenced by extraterrestrial forces. Her papers caused both excitement and ridicule in scientific circles. In 1892, Evelyn Harper joined an expedition to the remote Siberian wilderness, where a large meteor explosion had occurred. She hoped to find evidence of extraterrestrial life forms or unusual minerals. She never returned. Her last telegraph to a colleague in Boston only said that she had discovered resonant crystals and bioluminescent plant patterns identical to those in Hollow Bay. The other members of the expedition reported that she had ventured into the central area of the crater alone and simply vanished. Not a single trace of her was ever found. The ruins of Blackthorn Cliff, remained a cursed place. Local sailors avoided it, claiming that on foggy nights they could still see strange green lights emanating from under the water and sometimes hear a low hum that seemed to echo from deep within the earth. But the legacy of the Nebula Order did not seem to end with the cliff's collapse. In the following decades, stories of secret research groups, wealthy industrialists investing in strange technologies, and reports of unexplained phenomena emerged around the world. Some believed that Samuel Marwood, with his knowledge from the Veil Crosses, had somehow survived the collapse, or that his consciousness had been transferred elsewhere. To this day, rumors persist of a secret society of scientists and financiers who continue the work of the Nebula Order. It is said that they gather in places with unusual geomagnetic properties, using advanced technology to try to reopen the gate between worlds. And it is said they are searching for a secret that has been passed down, the secret of evolution and the infinite knowledge of the universe. Is there any truth to these rumors? Did a fragment of the Nebula Order survive and evolve? And what of the entities they communicated with? The Veil Crosses that Samuel believed had seeded life. Are they still waiting on the other side of the veil, patiently waiting for another invitation to enter our world? Look up at the night sky, dear readers, and perhaps tonight, ask yourselves what really lurks in the space between the stars. For at the furthest frontiers of science, some mysteries are perhaps best left undiscovered.